My new husband smashed my daughter's piggy bank and cut all her money in half to teach her about sharing. The bank teller immediately called the Secret Service. My new husband Keith had been eyeing my daughter Lily's piggy bank since he moved in 3 months ago. Every time he walked past her room, he'd make these little comments about how an 8-year-old shouldn't have that much money just sitting around. Kids today don't understand the value of sharing. He'd tell his buddy Ramon over beers in our garage. When I was growing up, everything belonged to the family. No one got to hoard cash like some tiny dictator. The piggy bank wasn't even anything special. Just this ceramic cow Lily got from her grandma before she died. But Keith treated it like it was personally insulting him. He'd been unemployed for 6 months when we got married, said he was between opportunities, waiting for the right management position to open up. Meanwhile, my daughter had saved $180 from birthday money and doing extra chores around the neighborhood. Keith started small at first. Hey Lily, shouldn't you help out with groceries since you live here too? Then it escalated. That money could pay for our cable bill. You know how selfish it looks keeping money from your family? Lily would just clutch that cow tighter and tell him it was for summer camp next year. Last Tuesday, I came home from my shift at the hospital to find Keith standing in Lily's room with the smashed piggy bank on her carpet. Ceramic pieces everywhere. Lily sobbing in the corner. But the money, that's what made my blood freeze. He'd taken scissors to every single bill, cut them clean in half. $20 bills, tens, fives, even the ones. All sliced right down the middle. Keith saw me and immediately started his speech. She needs to learn about sharing, Diane. I told her we'd split everything 50-50. Half for her little camp thing, half for the household. But she threw a tantrum, so I had to show her what happens when you're greedy. Look, I made it literal. Half and half. Fair is fair. Lily ran to me holding fistfuls of mutilated money. Mommy, he broke Grandma's cow. He cut all my money. I saved for so long. Keith rolled his eyes. Don't be so dramatic, kiddo. Banks can exchange damaged bills. We'll take your half to the bank tomorrow, get fresh bills. No harm done. Plus, now you've learned about contributing to your household. You're welcome. His buddy Ramon was actually in the living room, and Keith called out to him. You believe this, Ray? Kids acting like I committed murder instead of teaching a life lesson. The next morning, Keith insisted on coming to the bank with us. Wanted to make sure Lily properly explained that she was keeping only half for herself and donating half to household expenses. He even coached her in the car. Tell them you want to deposit half into my account. I mean, our household account. For groceries and bills, like a good family member. The teller at First National was this older lady named Dolores, who'd been helping me since I opened Lily's savings account 3 years ago. She took one look at the bag of cut money and her face changed. Lily, honey, what happened to your bills? Keith jumped in before I could speak. Kid had an accident with scissors. Happens all the time, right? Just need to exchange these for fresh bills. 50% will go into her account, 50 into mine. Teaching moment about sharing. Dolores picked up one of the cut 20s, examined it carefully. Sir, did you cut this money? Keith puffed up his chest. I was making a point about equal distribution. Visual learning for children. Very effective parenting technique. Dolores set down the bill and picked up her phone. I need to make a call. This will just take a moment. Keith laughed. Really? For some damaged bills? This is ridiculous customer service. We spend good money here. Within 10 minutes, 2 men in suits walked into the bank. Not local police. Actual Secret Service agents. The taller one, Agent Ryan, examined the bills while the shorter one, Agent Cole, started asking questions. Sir, are you aware that willfully destroying USS currency is a federal crime under Title 18, Section 333? Keith's face went white. What? No, that's not. I was teaching my daughter about sharing. Agent Cole pulled out a notepad. Your daughter, sir? Lily's my kid from before, I said quietly. We've been married 3 months. Agent Ryan looked up from the bills. So you destroyed your stepdaughter's money. Money that legally belongs to her. That's destruction of property and destruction of federal currency. 2 separate crimes. Keith started stammering. But I was teaching her about family contributions. Kids shouldn't hoard money. It's not healthy. Agent Cole raised an eyebrow. Sir, teaching children to share doesn't involve destroying legal tender. That's a federal offense punishable by fines and up to 6 months in prison. Plus, this appears to be theft and destruction of a minor's property. I can't go to prison for cutting some paper, Keith practically shouted. This is insane. You're all insane. Agent Ryan pulled out handcuffs. Sir, you just admitted to federal crimes in front of multiple witnesses. We're placing you under arrest. Keith turned to me, his face purple. I watched the purple drain from his face like someone pulled a plug. Agent Ryan had the handcuffs out and Keith's wrists were behind his back before he could finish whatever excuse he was trying to sputter. He kept saying it was all wrong, that he was teaching Lily about being part of a family, about responsibility. Agent Cole had this little card in his hand and started reading Keith his rights in this flat, bored voice, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Dolores stood behind her counter with her arms crossed, watching Keith get arrested with this look on her face like she was watching justice happen in real time. Keith twisted around to look at me, his mouth opening and closing. The other people in the bank had stopped what they were doing. This old man in a fishing hat just stared. A mom with 2 kids pulled them closer to her. Agent Ryan started walking Keith toward the door, and Keith suddenly found his voice again, yelling back at me over his shoulder. He said I needed to call a lawyer right now, that this was my fault for not backing him up. that married people are supposed to support each other. His voice got louder as they got closer to the door. Agent Ryan asked me if I needed medical help because my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold on to Lily. I told him I was fine and pulled Lily against my side. She buried her face in my shirt. The bank doors opened and Keith was still shouting as they took him outside. Something about how I was making a huge mistake, how he was going to remember this. Then the doors closed and it got quiet except for the normal bank sounds, people typing on keyboards and the copy machine running. Dolores came around from behind the counter and walked over to us. She got down on one knee so she was at Lily's eye level. Her voice was soft when she told Lily that the bank was going to give her new money to replace all the bills that got cut up. Lily looked up from my shirt with red eyes and asked if they could fix her grandma's cow too. I had to tell her no, that the ceramic pieces were too broken, but we could go shopping together and find a new special piggy bank. Maybe a different animal this time. Lily nodded but didn't say anything. Dolores stood back up and patted my arm, then went to talk to someone at the back of the bank. A man in a suit came out from an office, introduced himself as the bank manager. He said we should come with him somewhere more private. We followed him past the teller stations to a small office with a desk and 3 chairs. He offered us water and pulled out a box of tissues, sliding them across the desk to where Lily and I were sitting. He explained that the Secret Service needed to keep the cut-up bills as evidence for Keith's case, but the bank had already counted everything with the agents watching. Lily's account would get credited for the full $180 today, based on their count, and the official documentation from Agent Ryan and Agent Cole. He said it might take a few days to show up in the system, but it was already approved. I thanked him, and he left us alone in the office for a minute. I pulled out my phone and called Josephine. She answered on the first ring like she always does. When I told her what happened, that Keith cut up Lily's money and just got arrested by the Secret Service at First National, she didn't even pause. She said we were coming to stay with her family right now, that Lily shouldn't have to go back to that house today. I felt something loosen in my chest because I had no idea how to handle this by myself. Josephine said to pack bags for a few days and she'd have the guest room ready. She asked if I was okay to drive and I said yes, even though I wasn't sure. Agent Cole came into the office and handed me his business card. He said Keith would be arraigned within 48 hours, probably tomorrow morning at the federal courthouse downtown. He told me I should expect Keith or his lawyer to contact me about bail, but I had every right to refuse to help him. There was no legal obligation for me to post bail or assist in his defense. He said it very clearly like he wanted to make sure I understood. I put the card in my purse and thanked him. Lily and I walked out of the bank holding hands and got in the car. The drive home took 15 minutes but felt longer. Lily stared out the window and didn't say anything. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw Ramon's truck was still there. I told Lily we were just grabbing some clothes and stuff and then going to Aunt Josephine's house. She nodded. Inside, I moved fast through the rooms, pulling clothes from drawers and closets, grabbing toothbrushes and Lily's favorite books. She collected her stuffed animals from her bed, the unicorn and the bear and the floppy dog. Ramon was sitting on the couch in the living room looking uncomfortable when we came out with our bags. He stood up and started to say something about how he was sorry, that he should have stopped Keith. I cut him off and told him he needed to leave my house right now. He opened his mouth like he might argue, then looked at my face and left without another word. I locked the door behind him. At Josephine's house that evening, Marigold answered the door and immediately hugged Lily. She was 15 and took being a cousin seriously. She told Lily she was giving up her room and would sleep in her parents' room in a sleeping bag, that Lily could have the whole space to herself. Lily mumbled thank you but stayed close to me. Josephine made dinner, chicken and rice, but Lily barely touched hers. She sat next to me at the table and pushed food around her plate. Atticus, Josephine's husband, watched Lily for a minute and then gently suggested we look into counseling for her. He said this kind of thing, having a trusted adult destroy your property and your savings, could have lasting effects. I knew he was right. Josephine nodded and said she'd get some names of child therapists tomorrow. That night, I put Lily to bed in Marigold's room with its purple walls and posters of bands I didn't recognize. Lily fell asleep holding the unicorn but woke up 2 hours later crying. I heard her from the living room and ran in. She was sitting up in bed saying someone was breaking her things. I climbed into bed next to her and held her, promising that Keith wouldn't come near her again. I told her I was going to make sure she stayed safe. She eventually fell back asleep against my shoulder. I lay there in the dark thinking about all the signs I missed. The comments about Lily's money, the way he always had opinions about what she should do with her savings, how he talked about kids today not understanding sharing. I should have protected her from him before it got to this point. I should have seen what he was. My phone started ringing around 10. Keith's number. I ignored it. It rang again 5 minutes later. And again. And again. By the time midnight rolled around, he'd called 17 times. I finally listened to one voicemail. He was yelling about how I abandoned him in jail, how I was supposed to be his wife. How could I just leave him there? His voice got louder and angrier as the message went on. I blocked his number and went into the kitchen. Josephine was already there making tea. She handed me a mug and we sat at her kitchen table. She asked quiet questions about what I missed. What signs were there that Keith was dangerous to my daughter? I told her about the unemployment, about his obsession with Lily's piggy bank, about how he always wanted to know exactly how much money she had saved. Josephine listened and didn't judge. She just kept refilling my tea and letting me talk until I finally ran out of words around 2 in the morning. The next morning I woke up on Josephine's couch with Lily curled against me. My phone showed 7 missed calls from the hospital. I called back and got connected to my supervisor. I explained that I needed emergency family leave because my husband got arrested and my daughter was dealing with trauma. She didn't ask for details. She just told me to take the week and that my shifts would be covered. I thanked her, but my stomach was already twisting because Keith hadn't been contributing anything to our household income for 6 months. Missing a week of work meant missing a week of pay that we desperately needed. Lily stirred next to me and opened her eyes. She looked confused for a second before remembering where we were. I stroked her hair and told her we were safe here with Aunt Josephine. My phone rang again and I saw Agent Cole's name. I answered quietly and walked into Josephine's kitchen. Agent Cole told me Keith was arraigned this morning at the federal courthouse. Bail was set at $15,000. I felt relief wash over me because there was no way Keith could afford that. Then Agent Cole said Keith's mother apparently posted the 10% to a bail bondsman. My stomach dropped. Keith would be released later today with conditions including no contact with me or Lily. I asked how that was possible when he'd just been arrested for federal crimes yesterday. Agent Cole explained that bail is standard unless someone is a flight risk or danger to the community. Keith had no prior record, and the judge didn't consider currency destruction a violent crime. The no-contact order was the best protection I had right now. I hung up and stood in Josephine's kitchen shaking. Keith would be out by this afternoon. He'd go back to our house because technically it was his home too. Josephine found me there and I told her what Agent Cole said. She immediately pulled out her phone and started searching for family law attorneys. I told her I couldn't afford a lawyer right now, but she waved that off. She said I needed legal protection for Lily and we'd figure out the money part later. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone while Lily played with Marigold upstairs. Most attorneys wanted retainers between $3,000 and $5,000 just to start the case. One lawyer told me to call back when I had the money. Another said he was too busy to take new clients right now. I was about to give up when Josephine handed me a number for Clarence Poole. She said he was a friend of Atticus from church and he specialized in family law. I called and a man with a warm voice answered on the third ring. I explained my situation in a rush. My husband of 3 months destroyed my daughter's money and got arrested by the Secret Service. I needed a divorce and a restraining order, but I didn't have money for a big retainer. Clarence listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked a few questions about Keith's arrest and the federal charges. Then he said the circumstances were clear-cut, and he'd handled domestic financial abuse cases before. He could work out a payment plan with me. His fee would be $3,000 total, and I could pay $500 now and the rest over 6 months. I almost cried with relief. Clarence said he'd come to Josephine's house that afternoon to meet with me and start the paperwork. He arrived at 2 carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a suit that looked expensive. He shook my hand and sat down at Josephine's dining room table with me. Lily stayed upstairs with Marigold. Clarence pulled out a legal pad and started asking questions. How long had I known Keith before we married? What was his employment situation? When did the concerning behavior around Lily's money start? Had there been any other incidents of controlling or aggressive behavior? I answered everything honestly. The rushed courtship after my ex left. Keith's 6 months of unemployment. The constant comments about Lily hoarding money. Clarence took notes and nodded. He explained that Keith's arrest actually strengthened my position for divorce and custody protection. The federal charges showed a pattern of poor judgment and disregard for the law. The fact that he destroyed a child's property demonstrated he was unsafe around minors. Clarence said we could file emergency orders to keep Keith away from Lily and prevent him from accessing any shared assets. We needed to move fast before Keith's lawyer started making demands about marital property or visitation rights. I signed papers while Clarence explained each one. Petition for divorce citing irreconcilable differences and endangerment of a minor. Emergency restraining order requesting Keith stay 500 feet from me, Lily, this house, Lily's school, and my workplace. Motion for temporary full custody, with no visitation pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Clarence said he'd file everything tomorrow morning at the courthouse. Lily came downstairs while Clarence was packing up his briefcase. She stood in the doorway looking at him with suspicious eyes. Clarence smiled at her gently and introduced himself. He said he was a lawyer who helps families stay safe. Lily moved closer to me and grabbed my hand. After Clarence left, Lily asked if Keith was going to come back to our house. I had to explain that he might go back there because it was his home too. But he wasn't allowed to come near her or me because of the court order. She wanted to know if we could move somewhere he didn't know about. Her voice got small and scared. I realized she didn't feel safe even here at Josephine's house. She thought Keith could find us anywhere. I pulled her onto my lap and promised that the police and the courts were protecting us now. Keith would go to jail if he came near her. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe me. Later that afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It was Lily's school counselor. She said Lily's teacher noticed she was withdrawn and anxious in class today. She wasn't participating and seemed distracted. The counselor wanted to check in about what was happening at home. I called back and explained the situation in general terms. My husband had destroyed Lily's property and been arrested. We were staying with family while I filed for divorce. The counselor listened and made sympathetic sounds. She offered to check in with Lily daily and provide a safe space if she needed to talk during school hours. She said sometimes kids process trauma better when they have multiple trusted adults to turn to. I thanked her and felt grateful, but also heartbroken. My 8-year-old daughter needed this level of support because I'd married someone who turned out to be dangerous. Thursday morning, Clarence called to say he'd filed the divorce petition and emergency restraining order at the courthouse. The clerk stamped everything and gave him a case number. He explained that the court would schedule a hearing within 10 days. In the meantime, the temporary order was in effect immediately. Keith was legally prohibited from contacting either of us or coming within 500 feet of Josephine's house, Lily's school, or the hospital where I worked. If he violated it, I should call the police right away and they'd arrest him. Clarence said he'd also sent copies of all the paperwork to Keith's last known address and to the bail bondsman who posted his bond. Keith would be served officially within 48 hours. Around noon, Clarence called again. Keith's public defender, Dominic Harmon, had called him to discuss the criminal case. Dominic suggested that Keith wanted to apologize and make restitution for what he did. Maybe we could work something out that would help Keith's federal case. Clarence shut that down immediately. He told Dominic that any communication about Keith needed to go through him as my attorney. I wasn't interested in Keith's apologies or his money. I was interested in protecting my daughter from further harm. Dominic tried to argue that showing remorse and making amends could help Keith get a lighter sentence. Clarence said that wasn't my problem or my concern. Friday morning, I took Lily to meet Antonia Lake. Clarence had recommended her as a child therapist who specialized in family trauma. Her office was in a small building near the park, with a waiting room full of toys and children's books. Lily sat next to me on the couch and didn't touch anything. When Antonia came out to get us, Lily pressed against my side. Antonia was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a calm voice. She told Lily she could bring me into the session if that felt more comfortable. Lily nodded and held my hand as we walked into Antonia's office. The room had art supplies on shelves and a box of toys in the corner. Antonia sat in a chair and invited Lily to sit wherever she wanted. Lily chose the floor near my feet. Antonia started asking gentle questions about school and Lily's favorite things. Lily answered in one-word responses at first. Then Antonia brought out paper and markers and suggested Lily could draw while they talked. That seemed to relax her. Lily started drawing and Antonia asked about what happened with the piggy bank. Lily's hand moved faster across the paper. She drew the ceramic cow in pieces. Then she drew bills cut in half scattered around. Finally, she drew a face in clouds above the broken bank. She told Antonia it was her grandma crying because Keith broke the special gift she gave Lily before she died. Antonia listened and validated every feeling Lily expressed. By the end of the hour, Lily was talking more freely and even smiled once at something Antonia said. When we left, Antonia told me Lily was processing the trauma in healthy ways, but would benefit from weekly sessions for a while. That afternoon, I got a call from a woman who introduced herself as Michelle Wu. She was the federal prosecutor assigned to Keith's case. She explained that Keith was charged with defacing U.S. currency under federal law. The case was strong because he admitted to cutting the money in front of multiple witnesses, including Secret Service agents. There was also potential for state charges related to theft from a minor and destruction of property. Michelle said those charges would be up to the local district attorney, but she'd be coordinating with them. She needed me to be available to testify about Keith's behavior and the context around the incident. I told her I'd do whatever was necessary to make sure Keith faced consequences for what he did to Lily. Michelle said I should be ready to answer questions about Keith's behavior leading up to the incident, about the pattern of him demanding Lily share her money. I told her I'd do whatever she needed. That weekend, Atticus showed up at Josephine's house with his toolbox and a bag from the hardware store. He said we were going to change the locks at my house while Keith was out. I felt nervous about it because technically Keith had a right to be there. But Atticus said protecting Lily mattered more than property law. We drove over to my house and I kept watching the street, worried Keith would show up even though he wasn't supposed to come near me. Atticus worked fast, replacing the deadbolt on the front door and the lock on the back door. He handed me 3 sets of new keys and told me to keep one hidden outside in case of emergency. When we finished, I called Clarence to tell him what we'd done. He sighed and said it might cause problems in divorce court, that Keith's lawyer could argue I was keeping him from his home. But then he said he understood why I did it, that no judge would blame a mother for protecting her daughter. I asked if Keith could break in or call the police on me. Clarence said Keith would be stupid to try anything like that with the restraining order in place, that any contact would land him back in jail. 2 days later, I was at work doing my rounds on the 4th floor when security called my unit. They said a man matching Keith's description was in the lobby asking for me. My supervisor told me to stay where I was and called security back to have them escort him out. I went to the break room and watched through the window as 2 security guards walked Keith toward the exit. He kept turning around, trying to see up to where I worked. One of the guards put a hand on his arm and Keith jerked away, pointing up at the building. Then the police showed up. 2 officers got out of their car and talked to the security guards, and Keith's face went red as he gestured wildly. One officer pulled out handcuffs and Keith actually tried to walk away, but the other officer grabbed his shoulder. They put him in the back of the patrol car and I watched them drive away. My hands were shaking, so hard I had to sit down. My supervisor brought me water and told me to take the rest of my shift off, but I said I needed to work, needed to keep busy. I called Clarence from the break room and he was already on it. Security had called him right after they called the police. He said he was filing a motion for contempt immediately, that Keith had violated a court order and would face consequences. The contempt hearing got scheduled for Friday morning, less than a week after Keith showed up at the hospital. I took the day off and met Clarence at the courthouse. Keith was there with Dominic, looking tired and angry. The judge came in and didn't waste time. She asked Keith to explain why he violated the restraining order. Keith stood up and started talking about how he just needed 5 minutes to talk to me, how we could work things out if I'd just listened to him. He said he was trying to save our marriage. that I was overreacting to a simple parenting disagreement. The judge cut him off and asked if he understood what a restraining order meant. Keith said yes, but that it wasn't fair, that I was his wife, and he had a right to talk to me. The judge looked at him like he was something stuck to her shoe. She said restraining orders don't have exceptions for convenience or hurt feelings, that Keith had been explicitly told to stay away from me and my workplace. She asked if he thought the rules didn't apply to him. Keith started to answer, but Dominic put a hand on his arm, and Keith sat down. Clarence stood up and explained that this violation showed Keith was dangerous and couldn't follow court orders, that my daughter and I needed protection from someone who thought his wants mattered more than legal boundaries. The judge sentenced Keith to 5 days in county jail and extended the restraining order for another 6 months. She told Keith that the next violation would result in serious jail time, possibly months instead of days. Keith's face went purple again, and he started to stand up, but Dominic pulled him back down and whispered something that made Keith stay in his seat. While Keith sat in county jail, I went back to the house with Josephine and Atticus to pack up more of our things. We brought boxes and garbage bags, working through Lily's room first. I packed her clothes and books, her art supplies, and the few toys she'd left behind. In my bedroom, I grabbed my own clothes and personal items, leaving Keith's stuff exactly where it was. Atticus carried boxes out to Josephine's SUV while I went through the bathroom and kitchen. In Keith's office, I found his laptop sitting open on the desk. The screen was still on, showing some kind of forum. I sat down and started reading. Keith had been posting for months about entitled children and weak mothers who didn't teach discipline. He complained about kids who hoarded money instead of contributing to their families. He wrote long posts about how children today had no respect for authority, how they needed to learn that everything they had belonged to the family unit. Other users had responded with agreement, sharing their own stories about forcing kids to hand over birthday money or allowance. I felt sick reading it. This wasn't just about Lily's piggy bank. This was how Keith actually thought. I pulled out my phone and started taking screenshots of everything. Clarence had said anything showing Keith's mindset could be useful in custody proceedings, and this was gold. I screenshot every post Keith had made, every comment where he talked about teaching kids lessons through force. There were dozens of them going back almost a year, from before we even got married. Lily's next session with Antonia went better than I expected. Josephine took her while I dealt with paperwork for the divorce, and when they came back, Lily seemed lighter somehow. Josephine said Lily had talked a lot during the session, that Antonia had really connected with her. Later that evening, Lily told me she'd been feeling guilty, like maybe she had been selfish with her money. She said Keith kept telling her that good kids share with their family, and part of her wondered if he was right. I asked her what Antonia said about that. Lily explained that Antonia told her saving money wasn't selfish, that the money was hers because she'd earned it and it was a gift. Antonia had said that adults who hurt children are responsible for their own choices, not the children's behavior. Lily asked if that meant it wasn't her fault Keith broke her piggy bank. I pulled her close and told her it was never her fault, that Keith made his own choices and those choices were wrong. She nodded against my shoulder and said Antonia had told her the same thing, that sometimes adults do bad things and try to blame kids for it, but that doesn't make it true. The following week, Clarence called with news about the federal case. Michelle Wu had offered Keith a plea deal instead of going to trial. Keith would plead guilty to federal currency destruction, pay a $5,000 fine, serve 6 months of home detention with electronic monitoring and complete anger management counseling. Clarence said Dominic had contacted him to say Keith was thinking about taking it, but Keith wanted assurances that I wouldn't pursue additional state charges. I asked Clarence what that meant. He explained that the state could still charge Keith with theft from a minor and destruction of property, separate from the federal charges. Keith wanted me to promise I wouldn't cooperate with state prosecutors. Clarence said that wasn't happening, that those decisions weren't mine to make anyway. If the district attorney wanted to file charges, they would, and I had no control over that. He told me not to worry about Keith's demands, that we had bigger things to focus on, like the divorce hearing coming up. Clarence spent 2 hours preparing me for the divorce hearing. We sat in his office and he played devil's advocate, throwing Keith's likely arguments at me. He said Keith would probably claim I was overreacting, that he was just trying to be a parent to Lily, that our marriage could be saved with counseling. Clarence made me practice staying calm and factual, not getting emotional or defensive. He told me to focus on the pattern of controlling behavior around money, on Keith's unemployment, and constant demands that an 8-year-old contribute to household expenses. We practiced my testimony over and over until I could recite the facts without crying or getting angry. Clarence said the judge would be watching my demeanor, looking for signs that I was being vindictive or unreasonable. I needed to come across as a protective mother making rational decisions, not an angry wife seeking revenge. By the end of the session, I felt more confident. I knew what Keith would say, and I knew how to respond. The divorce hearing happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Keith got out of jail for contempt. I wore my best work clothes and met Clarence outside the courtroom. Keith showed up with Dominic representing him in family court, too. We went inside and the judge called the case. Dominic stood up and called Keith to testify first. Keith walked to the witness stand looking humble and sad. He testified that he was trying to teach Lily about family responsibility, that he grew up poor and learned to share everything with his siblings. He said he never meant to hurt or scare Lily, that he just wanted her to understand how families help each other. He talked about how hard it was unemployed, how stressed he felt about money, how he thought teaching Lily to contribute would help her develop good values. Dominic asked if Keith regretted his actions. Keith said yes, that he wished he'd handled things differently, that he loved Lily and wanted to be part of her life. He said our marriage could be saved if we went to counseling together, if I would just give him another chance to prove he could be a good husband and stepfather. Then it was my turn to testify. Clarence asked me to describe the months leading up to the piggy bank incident. I talked about Keith's constant comments about Lily's money, about how he'd suggest she should pay for groceries or cable bills. I explained that Keith had been unemployed the entire time we were married, that he contributed nothing financially while demanding my 8-year-old daughter hand over her birthday money and chore earnings. I described coming home from work to find Lily sobbing over her destroyed piggy bank and cut-up savings. I told the judge about the ceramic cow from Lily's grandmother who died, about how Keith had smashed something irreplaceable and then acted like Lily was being dramatic for being upset. Clarence asked about Keith's behavior at the bank. I recounted how he coached Lily in the car, how he admitted to cutting the money in front of Secret Service agents, how he seemed to think he'd done nothing wrong. The judge listened carefully and took notes. I could see from her expression that she wasn't buying Keith's explanation about teaching family values. She looked skeptical when I described Keith's arrest, almost angry when I mentioned him showing up at my workplace in violation of the restraining order. Josephine testified next as a witness. She told the judge about my phone call from the bank, about how scared and confused I sounded. She described Lily's state when we arrived at her house that first night, how Lily was shaking and couldn't stop crying. Josephine talked about the nightmares Lily had been having, about how Lily asked if Keith would find them even at Josephine's house. She said she'd been watching her niece carefully over the past few weeks, and Lily still showed signs of anxiety and fear. Then Atticus took the stand. He testified about helping me change the locks, about how necessary it felt to protect Lily from Keith accessing the house. He talked about finding Keith's laptop and the forum posts. Clarence had him describe what he saw, the posts about entitled children and weak mothers. Dominic objected repeatedly, saying the laptop evidence was obtained improperly, but the judge overruled him and said she wanted to hear what Atticus found. Atticus explained the months of posts Keith had made, the pattern of believing children's money belonged to parents, the discussions about forcing kids to hand over their savings. The judge asked to see the screenshots I'd taken and spent several minutes reading through them while the courtroom stayed quiet. The judge set down her pen and looked directly at Keith. Her voice stayed calm and measured as she worked through her ruling. Divorce granted effective immediately. Full custody awarded to Diane with no visitation rights for Keith. Child support ordered based on imputed income at minimum wage full-time employment, totaling $580 monthly. She paused and looked at the court reporter to make sure everything was recorded properly. Keith's actions constituted financial abuse of a minor child. His behavior demonstrated emotional harm and manipulation of an 8-year-old. The court sees no evidence that he possesses the judgment or self-control necessary to safely interact with children. Keith's face went from pale to bright red. His hands gripped the table edge so hard his knuckles turned white. Keith exploded out of his chair. "This is completely unfair. You're all listening to her lies. She's been poisoning everyone against me since the beginning. I have rights as a stepfather. I was married to her. That gives me legal standing with the kid." The bailiff moved toward him immediately while the judge raised her hand. "Mr. Peterson, you will sit down and control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt of court." Keith ignored her and kept shouting. "She's turning everyone against me. The cops, the lawyers, now you. I was teaching the kid about family responsibility, and everyone acts like I committed murder." Dominic grabbed Keith's arm and tried to pull him back into his seat while whispering urgently. The bailiff reached Keith and put a firm hand on his shoulder. Keith shrugged him off. "Don't touch me. This whole system is rigged." The judge's expression hardened. "Mr. Peterson, you are now in contempt of court. Bailiff, please restrain him." The bailiff moved Keith's arms behind his back while Dominic stood up looking mortified. "Your Honor, I apologize for my client's outburst. He's under extreme stress." The judge cut him off. "Your client just demonstrated exactly why this court made the correct decision about his fitness to be around children. He will spend tonight in county jail for contempt. We are adjourned." Clarence gathered his papers while Keith was escorted out, still yelling about injustice and conspiracy. We stepped into the hallway and he pulled me aside near a quiet corner. "Keith will almost certainly appeal the custody decision. That's his right, and Dominic will probably advise him to do it. But here's what you need to understand. The appeal process takes months, sometimes over a year. During that entire time, the orders we just got remain in full effect. Keith can't see Lily, can't contact either of you, has to pay the child support. Nothing changes until an appeals court rules differently. And honestly, after that performance in there, I don't see any judge overturning this." Clarence adjusted his glasses and looked at me directly. That outburst actually helped our case significantly. It demonstrated his complete inability to control his anger. It showed he doesn't understand appropriate behavior in serious situations. Most importantly, it proved he lacks insight into why his actions toward Lily were harmful. Any appeals judge will read that transcript and see a man who blames everyone except himself. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for weeks. My phone rang 2 days later while I was folding laundry at Josephine's house. Michelle's name appeared on the screen. I answered, and she got straight to the point without her usual pleasantries. "Keith rejected the plea deal. He wants to go to trial on the federal charges." I sat down on the couch because my legs suddenly felt unsteady. Michelle continued, her voice carrying clear frustration. "I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. Keith genuinely seems to believe he did nothing wrong. He thinks a jury will see him as a struggling stepfather trying to teach values rather than a man who committed federal crimes. His new attorney, Brian, apparently convinced him that they can win at trial. Michelle paused and I heard papers rustling. Diane, I need you to understand something. This is a massive miscalculation on Keith's part. The evidence against him is overwhelming. He admitted to cutting the money in front of Secret Service agents. We have bank surveillance footage. We have witness testimony from you, from Lily, from the bank teller. But trials take time and they're stressful for everyone involved. I'm sorry you'll have to go through this instead of having it resolved with a plea. I met with my supervisor at the hospital the following Monday. The HR office felt too formal and cold, so we sat in the staff break room with coffee while the floor stayed relatively quiet during the morning lull. I explained the situation as briefly as possible, focusing on the legal costs piling up and my need for additional income. My supervisor listened carefully and took notes on a small pad. She was older, maybe in her 50s, and had worked at the hospital for over 20 years. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with genuine concern. Diane, you've been with us for 6 years and you're one of our most reliable nurses. The hospital has an employee assistance fund specifically for situations like yours. It provides grants for workers facing family emergencies. Not loans, actual grants you don't have to pay back. She pulled out a form from a folder she'd brought with her. Let's fill this out right now. The committee meets on Thursday and they can approve funds within a week if your situation qualifies, which it absolutely does. She helped me work through each section, explaining what documentation I'd need and what expenses could be covered. Legal fees definitely qualified. So did therapy costs for Lily. By the time we finished, I felt a small spark of hope that maybe the financial pressure wouldn't crush us completely. Marigold found me in the kitchen at Josephine's house 3 weeks after Keith's arrest. I was making sandwiches for Lily's school lunch the next day, trying to keep some sense of normal routine going. Marigold leaned against the counter and watched me work for a moment before speaking. Aunt Diane, I need to tell you something about Lily. She cried last night after you left for your evening shift. My stomach dropped and I stopped spreading peanut butter. Marigold continued carefully. She told me she misses your house. She misses her room and her toys and her neighborhood. But she's scared to go back because she thinks Keith might be there. She asked me if he knows where we live, if he could find her here. I tried to explain about the restraining order, but I don't think she really understands how that works. She's 8. All she knows is that a grown-up she trusted hurt her and broke her things. I set down the knife and gripped the counter edge. We couldn't stay at Josephine's house forever. They kept saying we were welcome, that there was no rush, but this wasn't our home. Lily needed stability and permanence, not a temporary refuge that felt safe only because Keith didn't know the address yet. Clarence called me into his office the next afternoon to discuss property division in the divorce settlement. He had papers spread across his desk showing the mortgage balance, estimated home value, and equity calculations. Keith contributed absolutely nothing financially during your marriage. He was unemployed the entire time. He paid no bills, bought no groceries, made no mortgage payments. His criminal behavior and the restraining order further demonstrate he has forfeited any claim to marital property. I'm filing a motion for you to receive full ownership of the house. Keith sat across from me in the small office and explained the likely response. Dominic will argue that Keith is entitled to half the home equity because it's marital property regardless of his financial contribution. That's technically true under normal circumstances, but these aren't normal circumstances. Keith is in jail for federal crimes committed against your daughter. He violated a restraining order. He demonstrated financial abuse patterns. I'm confident the judge will see that awarding him any property interest would be rewarding his criminal behavior. Clarence pulled out another form. I'm also filing a motion to dismiss any claim he makes based on his current incarceration and the active restraining order. He has no right to benefit from crimes he committed. The HR representative called my cell phone on Friday afternoon while I was picking up Lily from the school. The Employee Assistance Committee approved your application. We're granting you $3,000 to help with legal expenses. I pulled over into a parking spot because tears started blurring my vision and I couldn't drive safely. The representative's voice stayed kind and professional. Diane, are you okay? I managed to say yes through the tightness in my throat. She continued explaining the details. The check will be ready for pickup on Monday. You can use it for any documented legal costs related to your situation. Attorney fees, court costs, therapy expenses for Lily. Just keep your receipts for our records. The hospital takes care of its people. That's not just something we say, it's what we do. You focus on your daughter's recovery and your own well-being. Let us worry about your work schedule for now. We'll make sure you have the shifts you need and the time off when you need it. After I hung up, I sat in the school parking lot and cried for 10 minutes. Not from despair this time, but from relief and gratitude that people I worked with actually cared enough to help. Michelle called again 2 weeks later with trial scheduling information. Keith's trial date is set for 6 weeks from now. That's actually pretty fast for federal court, which means the prosecutor's office is prioritizing this case. I'm going to need you to testify about the context of Keith's actions. The jury needs to understand this wasn't a one-time incident, but part of a pattern of obsessive behavior around Lily's money. I agreed immediately, and Michelle walked me through what to expect. Dominic, well, actually Brian now since Keith hired private counsel, will likely portray Keith as a struggling stepfather trying to teach values. He'll emphasize Keith's unemployment and financial stress. He'll try to make the jury sympathetic to Keith's situation. Your job is to stay factual and calm. Don't let Brian make you angry or defensive. Just tell the truth about what you observed and experienced. We spent the next hour practicing. Michelle asked me questions and critiqued my answers. Too much emotion there. Stick to facts. Good. That's specific and clear. Don't speculate about his motivations. Just describe his actions. By the end, I felt more prepared but also exhausted from reliving everything again. Lily had her weekly session with Antonia on Thursday afternoon. I waited in the reception area like always, flipping through magazines without really reading them. When the session ended, Antonia asked if I could join them for the last few minutes. Lily sat on the couch looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in weeks. Antonia smiled at both of us. Lily had a really good session today. She laughed at my terrible jokes. She talked freely about her feelings without shutting down. And she told me something important that I think you should hear directly from her. Antonia nodded at Lily encouragingly. Lily looked at me and spoke quietly but clearly. I want to save money again. For summer camp and maybe for a bike. But I'm scared someone will take it like Keith did. Antonia leaned forward slightly. So we talked about the difference between Keith's specific bad behavior and the general safety of saving money. Most people don't steal from children. Most adults protect kids and their belongings. Keith made bad choices that were wrong and illegal. That doesn't mean saving money is dangerous. It means Keith was dangerous and he's not around anymore to hurt you or take your things. I looked down at my hands, still trembling from the session. Antonia had given Lily tools to process everything, and watching my daughter laugh again felt like seeing sunlight after weeks of storms. Josephine caught me in the kitchen that evening while Lily and Marigold were upstairs doing homework. She poured 2 mugs of coffee and sat across from me at the table. I've been thinking about your situation. You and Lily have been through hell and I know you're worried about imposing on us. She pushed 1 mug toward me. I want you to stay here long term. We could convert the basement into a small apartment with a bedroom and living space. Make it yours. I started to protest, but she held up her hand. Family helps family, Diane. That's not negotiable. And Marigold loves having Lily around. The house feels fuller with you both here. I felt tears building again, the kind that came from gratitude instead of fear. She squeezed my hand across the table. Let us do this. You need stability right now, and we have the space. Atticus recruited me the following Saturday morning for the basement conversion project. He'd already mapped out the layout and ordered supplies through his contractor connections, getting everything at cost. We spent the weekend installing a small bathroom with a shower, then adding a kitchenette with a mini fridge and microwave. Lily appeared on Sunday afternoon with paint samples, asking if she could help with her new bedroom. She picked a soft purple color that reminded me of lavender fields. I watched her carefully roll paint onto the walls, her tongue sticking out in concentration. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely excited about something. She kept stepping back to admire her work, asking if the color looked good, if her grandma would have liked it. Atticus told her it was perfect, that she had good taste. By evening, the basement had transformed into a cozy 2-room space that felt safe and separate from everything that had happened. Clarence called on Tuesday with news from family court. The judge issued a final order on the house. You have full ownership and Keith has 30 days to sign over the deed. If he refuses, the court will execute the transfer without his signature. He explained that I could sell the property or rent it out and all income would be mine alone. This changes your financial situation significantly, Diane. That rental income or sale proceeds could help you rebuild. I thanked him and hung up, staring at my phone. The house Keith had tried to claim as his leverage was now entirely mine. The place where he'd destroyed Lily's piggy bank would become our path to financial stability. An unknown number lit up my phone screen Thursday afternoon. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Keith's mother started crying immediately. Please, you have to drop the charges against my son. He's a good man who made a mistake. He's struggling with unemployment and depression, and you're ruining his life over a misunderstanding. My jaw clenched. Your son committed federal crimes against my 8-year-old daughter. She kept going, her voice rising. He was just trying to teach her responsibility. Kids today are so spoiled and he wanted to help raise her right. You're destroying him over nothing. I cut her off. He cut up Lily's money with scissors. He smashed her grandmother's gift. He terrified my child in her own bedroom. Those are federal crimes, not parenting choices. She started to argue, but I hung up. My hands shook as I blocked the number. Michelle called Friday morning with an update about Keith's legal team. He fired Dominic and hired a private attorney. Some guy named Brian Meyer who specializes in defending white-collar federal crimes. This probably means Keith's family is funding his defense now. She paused. Meyer will be more aggressive than Dominic was. He'll try to paint Keith as a struggling stepfather who made a poor choice under financial stress. But the evidence is still overwhelming. Keith admitted everything in front of Secret Service agents. I asked if this changed our chances. Michelle laughed. Not really. Meyer can't change what Keith did or what he said. He can just make the trial more unpleasant for everyone involved. Lily's school conference happened the following Tuesday. Her teacher smiled as I sat down in the tiny chair across from her desk. I wanted to tell you that Lily's anxiety has decreased noticeably over the past 2 weeks. She's participating more in class, raising her hand for questions, playing with friends at recess. The school counselor joined us, adding that Lily had been using their check-in sessions well. She's processing the trauma in healthy ways with Antonia's support. She's talking about her feelings instead of bottling them up. I felt relief wash through me. We were finally moving in the right direction. My daughter was healing instead of breaking further. I met with Atticus again to discuss the house situation. He suggested renting it out instead of selling, and helped me find a property management company that would handle everything for a reasonable fee. The rental income will cover your mortgage plus give you about $400 extra monthly. That's real money, Diane. Money you can use to rebuild savings and pay down these legal bills. We signed the contract with the management company, and they had tenants lined up within a week. My house, the place where Keith had terrorized my daughter, would now fund our recovery and independence. Keith's trial began on a Tuesday morning. I took the day off work and drove to the federal courthouse downtown. Michelle met me outside and walked me through what to expect. Brian Meyer was exactly as she'd described, slick and aggressive in his expensive suit. When I took the stand, he started with sympathetic questions about Keith's unemployment and financial stress. Wasn't he trying to teach your daughter about family responsibility? Didn't he grow up in poverty and want to instill better values? Michelle objected repeatedly. During her questioning, she systematically dismantled Brian's narrative. She highlighted that destroying federal currency is illegal regardless of intent or parenting philosophy. She walked me through Keith's months of obsessive comments about Lily's money, his escalating demands, his complete disregard for my daughter's property and emotional well-being. The jury took notes while I spoke. Dolores testified next, describing Keith's demeanor at the bank. He was insistent that cutting the money was a teaching moment. He showed no remorse whatsoever, just kept talking about how children need to learn to share. Agent Ryan followed her, testifying about Keith's admission of guilt at the scene and his entitled attitude during the arrest. The prosecution played video from the bank's security cameras. The jury watched Keith coaching Lily in the car, telling her to say the money was for household expenses. They watched him puff up his chest at Dolores, explaining his visual learning technique. They watched him argue with Secret Service agents about cutting paper. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning. The foreperson stood and announced the verdict. Guilty on the federal charge of defacing U.S. currency. Keith's face went red and he started to stand up, but Brian grabbed his arm and whispered something sharp that made him sit back down. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The verdict validated everything. What Keith did was actually criminal, not just bad parenting like he kept claiming. The judge set a sentencing date for 2 weeks out and dismissed the jury. I walked out of the courtroom with Michelle, finally able to breathe properly for the first time in months. 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and waiting. The sentencing hearing arrived on a Thursday morning, and I sat in the same courtroom where the jury had delivered their verdict. Michelle stood at the prosecutor's table in a navy suit, organizing her notes while Brian sat beside Keith at the defense table. Keith wore an orange jumpsuit now since he'd been held without bail after his contempt violation. His face looked thinner, harder than it had been at the trial. Michelle addressed the judge first, laying out her argument for the maximum sentence. She walked through Keith's complete lack of remorse, his violation of the restraining order just days after his arrest, his pattern of financial abuse toward an 8-year-old child. She pulled up the forum posts Atticus had found on Keith's laptop, reading excerpts where Keith complained about entitled children and weak mothers who don't enforce discipline. The judge listened carefully, taking notes. Brian stood up next and tried a different approach. He talked about Keith's difficult childhood, his struggles with unemployment, the stress of blending families. He argued that Keith had already lost his marriage, his home, his reputation, and that probation with community service would serve justice better than prison time. He claimed Keith had learned his lesson through the court process and just needed anger management counseling to move forward. The judge looked at Keith directly and asked if he wanted to make a statement. Keith stood up slowly, and for a moment I thought he might actually apologize. Instead, he started talking about how children today don't understand sacrifice, how his generation learned to share everything with family, how he was just trying to teach Lily important values about contributing to the household. Brian tried to stop him, but Keith kept going, saying the whole situation had been blown out of proportion, that cutting some bills shouldn't result in federal charges. The judge's expression hardened with each word Keith spoke. She sentenced him to 6 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release after that, a $5,000 fine and mandatory anger management counseling twice a week for the entire supervised release period. Keith's face went from pale to red as the judge read the sentence. The marshal stood up to take Keith away, and he turned in his seat to stare at me. Pure hatred blazed in his eyes, like I had personally destroyed his life instead of him destroying my daughter's property and savings. I held his gaze and felt something shift inside me. The fear that had been sitting in my chest since the day he smashed Lily's piggy bank just evaporated. I wasn't scared of Keith anymore. I was angry at myself for not seeing who he really was before I married him, for bringing him into Lily's life, for ignoring the red flags when he started obsessing over an 8-year-old's birthday money. I felt sad for Lily that she had to experience this kind of betrayal from someone who was supposed to be a parent figure. But I wasn't afraid of Keith because he had no power over us anymore. The judge had taken that power away, and Keith was going to spend the next 6 months in a cell thinking about what he'd done, except he probably wouldn't actually think about it, because people like Keith never believe they're wrong. That evening after I picked Lily up from the school, we sat in her temporary bedroom at Josephine's house. She was quiet during homework time, barely touching her math worksheet. Finally, she looked up at me and asked if Keith was going to jail for a long time. I sat down on the edge of her bed and explained that 6 months wasn't really a long time for adults, but it was enough time for us to feel safe and settled. I told her that by the time Keith got out, we'd have our own place again, and he wouldn't be allowed to contact us. She thought about this for a while, chewing on her pencil the way she always did when she was processing something difficult. Then she asked if we could get a new piggy bank. Maybe a turtle instead of a cow this time, since the cow reminded her of Grandma and what Keith did to it. Relief washed over me because she was ready to start saving again, ready to trust that her money would be safe. That weekend I took her to the gift shop downtown, where she spent 20 minutes examining every ceramic animal bank on the shelf, before choosing a bright green turtle with a cheerful painted face and big eyes. She held it carefully in both hands all the way home. Clarence called me into his office the following Tuesday to close out my case. He had the final divorce decree and custody orders printed out in a neat folder, and he walked me through each document. Keith's prison sentence and criminal record meant he was extremely unlikely to successfully appeal anything, and even if he tried, the appeals process would take months, and he'd need to prove the judge made a legal error. Clarence explained that Keith had signed over the house deed from jail through his lawyer, so the property was entirely mine now. When I asked about his bill, Clarence told me he was charging less than half his normal rate for the case. He said the circumstances were clear-cut and he was glad he could help. That Lily seemed like a tough kid with a good mom. I started crying right there in his office, overwhelmed by the kindness of people through this nightmare. Dolores at the bank had called the Secret Service instead of just exchanging the bills. Josephine had opened her home without hesitation. Atticus had helped with locks and basement renovations. Clarence had taken my case knowing I couldn't afford his full rate. All these people had shown up when I needed them most. Antonia had been working with Lily twice a week since the arrest, and during one of our parent sessions, she recommended a support group for single mothers that met Thursday evenings at the community center. I started attending the next week, nervous about sharing my story with strangers, but hearing other women talk about leaving abusive relationships helped me process my own guilt about marrying Keith so quickly after my first husband left. I kept thinking I should have seen the signs, should have protected Lily better, should have waited longer before bringing someone new into our lives. One woman in the group, a nurse named Catherine who'd left her husband after he'd controlled all their finances for years, pointed out that Keith's behavior had gotten worse after marriage. That was a classic abuse pattern, she explained. Abusers often hide their worst behaviors until after commitment, when they think their victim is locked in. I shouldn't blame myself for not predicting that Keith would destroy my daughter's property, because that kind of escalation wasn't something anyone could see coming. The group leader agreed and talked about how abusers are skilled at hiding their true nature until they feel secure enough to show it. 3 months after Keith's sentencing, Lily and I had settled into a comfortable routine in our basement apartment at Josephine's house. The rental income from my house came in steady each month, covering the mortgage plus giving me $400 extra. Lily's nightmares had mostly stopped, though she still had bad dreams occasionally about people breaking her things. She was saving money again in her turtle piggy bank, but this time she kept it in a locked box under her bed that only she and I had keys to. She'd saved $60 so far from helping Josephine with yard work and doing extra chores around the house. Sometimes I'd catch her counting the bills carefully, making sure they were all still there and whole. It broke my heart that she needed that reassurance, but I was glad she felt safe enough to save again. Antonia scheduled a parent session to discuss Lily's progress. She told me that Lily was doing better than expected given the trauma she'd experienced. Children are naturally tough when they have strong support systems, Antonia explained, and the fact that I had immediately protected Lily and removed Keith from her life probably prevented much deeper psychological damage. If I had stayed with Keith or made excuses for his behavior, Lily would have internalized the message that she didn't deserve protection, or that destroying her property was somehow acceptable. Instead, she saw that adults who hurt children face real consequences, and that her mother would always choose her safety over everything else. Antonia recommended continuing therapy for another few months, and then moving to monthly check-in sessions instead of weekly ones. 6 months after sentencing, I got a notification in my email from Keith's probation officer. Keith had been released from federal prison after serving his full sentence, and had moved to a different state to live with his mother in Arizona. The probation officer explained in the email that Keith was prohibited from contacting either of us under the terms of his supervised release, and any violation would send him back to prison immediately. He had to check in with his probation officer weekly, attend anger management counseling twice a week, and maintain employment. If he violated any of these conditions, he'd go back to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. I forwarded the email to Clarence just to document it, and he replied that I should keep all communications from the probation officer in case we ever needed them. But he thought it was unlikely Keith would violate his release terms since he'd already spent 6 months in federal prison and probably didn't want to go back. Lily's 9th birthday came around in May, and we threw a party at Josephine's house with decorations in the backyard. She invited 6 friends from the school, and Marigold invited 2 of her friends who had become like bonus cousins to Lily over the past months. We had pizza and ice cream cake, and Lily opened presents at the picnic table while everyone watched. Her grandparents sent birthday cards with money inside, and her aunt from California sent a check for $50. After she opened everything, Lily carefully collected all the birthday money and walked inside to her room. I followed her and watched as she put each bill into her turtle bank through the slot on top, smoothing them flat first. She told everyone at the party that she was saving for summer camp, and I saw that she'd reclaimed her right to save and plan for her future. She wasn't afraid anymore that someone would take it or destroy it. She trusted that her money was hers and that I would protect it. The following week, my supervisor called me into her office at the hospital. I thought something was wrong, But instead she told me about a senior position that had opened up in the surgical unit. Better pay, more regular hours, and it would be mostly day shifts instead of the rotating schedule I'd been working. She said she was impressed with how I'd handled everything over the past months while maintaining my work quality, and she thought I deserved the promotion. The extra income would mean an additional $800 per month, enough that I could start looking for a small house to rent for just Lily and me. When I told Josephine about the promotion and my plans to find our own place, she insisted there was no rush. She said we should stay until we found the perfect house, that having us there had been good for Marigold, and that she'd miss having Lily around every day. But I could see in her eyes that she understood why we needed our own space again, why Lily needed to feel like we had a home that was just ours. I started looking at rental listings in April, scrolling through pages on my phone during lunch breaks at the hospital. The extra income from my promotion meant I could afford something small but decent, and I wanted Lily to have her own space again. She'd been happy at Josephine's house, but I could tell she missed having a place that was just ours. I found a 2-bedroom house 3 blocks from Josephine's place, close enough that Lily could walk over to see Marigold whenever she wanted. The landlord showed us around on a Saturday morning, and Lily ran from room to room checking out the closets and the backyard. She picked out which bedroom would be hers, the one with the window facing the big oak tree, and asked if we could paint it purple like her room at Josephine's. I signed the lease that afternoon and gave the landlord first month's rent plus deposit, money I'd saved from my promotion and the rental income from my old house. Josephine helped me pack our things from the basement apartment, wrapping dishes in newspaper and labeling boxes with a marker. Marigold kept stealing Lily's stuffed animals and hiding them in different boxes, making Lily laugh and chase her around. Atticus borrowed a truck from someone at work and loaded our furniture, the bed frames and dressers, and the small couch Josephine had given us when we first moved in. We spent the whole weekend moving, carrying boxes up the front steps and arranging furniture in the new rooms. Lily set up her bookshelf and organized her art supplies while Marigold helped her hang posters on the walls. That first night in the new house, I watched Lily unpack her turtle bank from the box marked bedroom stuff. She carried it carefully to her dresser and set it right on top, not in a drawer or closet or locked box. The ceramic turtle sat there in plain view with its cheerful painted face, and I saw Lily run her fingers over it gently before stepping back. She turned to me and said she'd saved $240 now, enough for summer camp plus extra spending money for snacks and souvenirs. I asked if she was sure she wanted to leave it out where anyone could see it, and she nodded and told me she wasn't scared anymore. She said she knew I would always protect her, and that bad people face consequences when they hurt kids. I felt something loosen in my chest, some tight knot I'd been carrying since the day Keith destroyed her cow bank. Later that night, I tucked Lily into bed in her new purple room with the oak tree outside her window. She was already half asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, and I sat on the edge of her bed smoothing her hair back from her forehead. I looked around at the room we'd built together, the safe space we'd created, and realized we'd made something good from the wreckage Keith had left behind. We had a home that was ours, family support from Josephine and Atticus and Marigold, financial stability from my promotion and the rental property, and most importantly, Lily knew she was valued and protected. Life wasn't perfect, and we both still had moments when the anxiety crept back in, but we were genuinely happy. Lily was looking forward to summer camp in July, to making new friends and learning to kayak and doing arts and crafts. I was looking forward to watching her grow up safe and confident, to new adventures together, to a future where we got to decide who was part of our family and who wasn't.